Hello everyone and welcome back to the SmeeSports YouTube channel. Not a live stream today, no interviews. It's actually time for my Premier League predictions, one of the earlier ones coming out on YouTube. My goal was to be the first one seen. Unfortunately, Thogden beat me to it. I believe his posted around 4 hours ago as a recording, but I didn't watch it. Last year, I had the advantage of seeing what other content creators predicted. This year, I'm going in blind, did not watch that video, have not seen anyone's predictions. This is purely what I believe is going to happen in this upcoming Premier League season. It's going to be an interesting one, but before we get underway with my predictions for the 24-25 season, why not look back at the predictions from last year? I did the scoring system similar to other content creators where you were given a point for each place you were off. So say that I predicted a team to finish in 5th that finished in 7th. I get 2 points. The least amount of points possible would be best. I ended up with 48, which isn't that bad of a number. I'm really impressed with it. My worst one's going as Burnley -7. I was off a long ways with them. I believe I had them in 12th. And then 2 teams off by 6, with Brentford being the first one in 10th. They finished in 16th. And Man United, my team, I had them in 2nd. They finished all the way in 8th. Otherwise, it was solid. I had 3 bang on. I had Man City, which really doesn't count as number 1. I mean, most people had that one right. 6th, Chelsea. I'm very happy with that prediction being correct. And another interesting one, Nottingham Forest in 17th. A lot of people had them going down. I had it spot on. With that out of the way, my goal for this year, 45 points or lower. Slight improvement. Let's get into the predictions. One last thing before we get into our predictions, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you are new and enable push notifications to be notified when I upload. Looking to get to 250 subscribers by the end of this calendar year. Have some exciting things planned for the next couple of weeks, so stay tuned to see what happens. It's going to be fun. 20 is Ipswich Town. It's been a long time since they've been in the Premier League. This will be the first year that I have watched the Premier League, and they are going to be in it. Looking at their signings, Amari Hutchins, $23 million from Chelsea. Jacob Greaves, $21.5 million from Hull. Liam Delap, $17, almost $18 million from Man City. Muric, the goalkeeper from Burnley, for just under $10 million. And Ben Johnson on a free from West Ham. Those numbers coming from transfer market, as will all of the transfer fees, except for a couple. So if they are off, I apologize. That is the numbers that I found. And their outgoings, 9 players, 1 retired, 1 left for just under $2 million. 2 have no club now. 3 left on free transfers just somewhere else. And then 1 just was gone. I don't know exactly the designation. It was an undisclosed fee, I'm pretty sure. But that was just one that was really not important to this prediction or to Ipswich. Everyone's going to have them finish 20th. I know I put Luton in 20th last year. It's a carbon copy of it. It's a repeat. But when looking at this model reminds me a lot of Fulham in 17-18, I believe it was, when they brought in a lot of the guys. Like Sari is the one I vividly remember. Sessegnon, another guy who was there. We'll talk about him later in the video. But it reminds me a lot of that. Kieran McKenna, I think, is a good coach. I don't think him alone will be enough to keep this team in the Premier League. Hopefully, Ipswich can make some noise like Luton did down the stretch last year, but ultimately, I don't see it happening. Ipswich in 20th, rooted to the bottom of the league. 19th, Brentford. It's a bold one. It is a very bold prediction, given where I had them last year in 10th. They finished a little bit lower than that. Thomas Frank, a decent manager. The squad doesn't really show me that much. Obviously, you have Ivan Toney, but even if he stays, he wasn't all that convincing in the Premier League last year. Hopefully, for Brentford's sake, he stays, and if he does and produces at the levels we saw him do a couple of years ago, then yes, I think we will see Brentford stay in the league, but I just don't see it as of right now. Looking at their signings, they have Igor Thiago, $33 million from Club Brugge. It screams Wesley Moraes, I believe it was, the signing for Aston Villa a couple of years ago. Didn't do much after tearing it up in the Belgian league. Was eventually, I believe, just released. Don't quote me on that, but he was, if anything, sold for £5 million or less. It wasn't an inspiring signing, and this screams a repeat of that. I mean, last year he was pretty good. 18 goals in 34 matches. I feel like Brentford, their time has come in the league. They'll go back down in the championship, and we'll see them again in a couple of years. Best of luck to the Bees, but as of right now, I don't see them staying in the Premier League another year. 18th, Nottingham Forest. Kind of a bold prediction, but at the same time, not really. The implosion has been building for years. A lot of big money signings, a lot of players coming in the door and leaving the next season. That's how you don't have chemistry. It's a similar issue to Chelsea, but with, I hate to say, less quality, but that's the best term I can use for it. Chelsea getting a lot of great signings. We'll talk about them in a little bit sooner than you may think. But looking at their signings, you have Elliot Anderson coming through the door for just over $40 million from Newcastle. Milenkovic from Fiorentina for 14 mil. Had a solid Euros for Serbia when they ended up getting knocked out. He played his part, had an above 7 rating, and as well in Serie A, an above 7 match rating on average across the last 3 seasons, which is really impressive to do with a Fiorentina side who has had their struggles. They've had their ups and downs over the past couple of years and really the past decade. Looking at the players that have left, they lost 14. There is that turnover. A player comes in 1 year and leaves the next. We saw that with Lacadimos going to Newcastle. An interesting signing for the Magpies. Good bit of business from Nottingham Forest to flip him, as he really wasn't going to be the starter this upcoming year. One that's going to concern me is Freuler, the center mid from Switzerland, who had a nice Euros, selling him for, I believe, around $5 million to Bologna. It's an interesting move. A great move from the Italian side, but from Nottingham Forest perspective, I don't really get it. He would have been a good anchor in their midfield, and Felipe retiring wasn't the same player that he was at Atletico Madrid a couple of years ago. He's not that big of a loss, but I feel like it's going to come down to the end, and it's going to come down to financial fair play punishments. If Leicester and Everton get big punishments, or even if Forest gets a punishment like they did last year, I believe they lost a couple of points, we could see this table shake up completely different. I'm going into this assuming Everton and Leicester will lose around 5 points. Leicester maybe a little bit more. But either way, I see Nottingham Forest getting relegated regardless of what happens with Everton or Leicester City. It's going to be a tight race, but I feel like by game week 38, we'll know that the 3 teams going down, with Nottingham Forest being shut out of Premier League survival in match week 37. 17th, Everton. Survive and advance. That has to be the mentality of Everton. They have 38 game weeks to make something happen for themselves in the Premier League, and their goal has to be to get to the 25-26 season. Obviously, they want to win games. They want to make it far in the cup. They want to make a run in those competitions. But their biggest priority has to be staying in the Premier League. They're getting a new stadium, which is going to cost a fortune. Without the Premier League TV money, this team could be in financial ruin and could suffer the same fate that Bordeaux suffered earlier this week. Definitely a sad story over in France. Speaking of France, that's where Everton went shopping for one of their marquee signings with Ndiaye, the former striker of Sheffield United, who tore up the championship a couple of years ago. Didn't do all too well with Marseille. He looks to come back to England and make an impact for the Toffees early and often in this campaign. Jesper Lindstrom on loan from Napoli, a good bit of business. An attacking mid who can be creative in the center, feeding Ndiaye, feeding a potentially healthy Dominic Calvert-Lewin, or if need be, Anil Mopé, if Sean Dyche favors him in the lineup at certain points of the year. As for people leaving Goodison Park, Onana, Godfrey, Dobbin, and Harrison. The first 3 being sold for a combined around $75 million. You can tell this is a team who's trying to keep their finances in the green and avoid going into the red more than they have to. And Harrison, his loan ending, that will hurt. If they can bring him back for a cheap deal, by all means, do it. He was a solid player for them. I'm not going to say he was great because he wasn't, but he was serviceable for the Toffees, and that could be a player you bring back. He's not going to need to take time to get reintegrated to the squad. He's not going to take time to have to learn Dyche ball. He knows it. He was in the system last year, so why not bring him back if the books allow them to? It's going to be a tough year for Everton, But if they can stay above the relegation zone and be in the Premier League for the 25-26 season, I feel like that will be a huge win for them and a step in the right direction for them getting back to where they want to be competing for Europe. 16th, Leicester City. It's a bold shout to have Leicester City this high, especially with the impending financial fair play rules hammering down on them. It's going to be tough, but I feel like they have it in them. Yes, they have Steve Cooper, who struggled with Nottingham Forest last year, leading to him getting sacked in favor of Nuno. But I feel like he has just enough, similar to Nottingham Forest in his first year in the Premier League, to keep them in the Premier League for another year. Looking at their signings, nothing really crazy. Decordova-Reid, a nice free signing from Fulham that will definitely help. They had the right wing from Sporting coming in for $17 million. Okoli from Atalanta for $14 million. And as for transfers out, Kieran Dewsbury-Hall is going to hurt. He is out for $35.4 million. And then 3 free transfers. They let Mark Albrighton, Dennis Praet, and Kelechi Iheanacho leave. I don't really hate that decision. Iheanacho especially, a lot of wages. Let him walk. Albrighton, another player part of the miracle 15-16 season and the great escape in 14-15, gone out of Leicester. Jamie Vardy, if I'm not mistaken, is the final survivor from those two teams. So we'll see how long he has left at the King Power Stadium. They have a lot of talent on this team. They were a good team when they got relegated. The goalkeeping position is going to be one of concern. Looking at Hermansen, 6.85 match rating, 13 clean sheets in 44 games this past year, allowing 41 goals. That's not that bad, but the thing that I'm concerned about is he had 3 errors that led to goals in the Championship. You cannot be having that happen in the Premier League, or you'll have a Burnley situation where last year you had James Trafford early. He made some errors. Their new goalkeeper, who has since been sold, he made some errors. He needs to be a steady presence in between the sticks. I feel like if Kasper Schmeichel wouldn't have gone to France when he did, Leicester would not have been relegated and would not have been in the Championship last year. That's neither here nor there. We're in the here and now, and I feel like Leicester just has enough, even with some financial sanctions and point sanctions upcoming, to stay in the Premier League another year. 15th, Fulham. This is one of the few changes I made after writing out my original prediction table last night. I switched them with a team in 14th, who we'll hear in a minute. But looking at this Fulham team, I feel like they're bound to have a slight downgrade on the season they had last year. They only brought back Ryan Sessegnon at the time of originally writing. Here is our first of 2 Fabrizio Romano bombshell here we goes. That happened just before I started recording. You have Jorge Suena for an undisclosed price from Villarreal. The center back looks to bolster their defense. It's not a bad move for them, but still, I don't think they have spent the money they got for João Palhinha all too well. They don't really have any inspiring players outside of him. He was their best player, one of the best players they've had at the club for a long time. He finally got his Bayern move a year later. I wanted to see them spend their money better, or at least spend their money. They also lost Adebayo on a free, Decordova-Reid to Leicester, who we just mentioned a minute ago, and Rodak on a free to Saudi. Rodak won't hurt as much as the others. You can't lose that many players and not replace them. There has to be someone that Fulham can go out and get. They're a mid-table Premier League side. Look in the Championship. You had a couple teams get relegated last year with plenty of talented players. Yes, they were in the Premier League and then went right back down, all 3 teams. But there's still some talent there. I believe Sander Berg, I forget where he went, but I'm pretty sure he was at Sheffield this past year. That could be one they could have gone out and signed. I don't get it. I feel like Fulham will survive easily again this year and then coast into May like they did this past season. Overall, Fulham, another year in the Premier League, but I feel like their relegation is coming soon. Give it 5 years, and I think they'll be back in the Championship. 14th, Wolves. The team that I had in 15th originally instead of Fulham, but flipped it after. The reason why is just the signings. When we look at the signings, Rodrigo Gomes, Pedro Lima, combined $25 million for both of them. Tommy Doyle coming in for $5 million from Man City. You have Larson on loan from Celta Vigo. Good signings. Yes, they lost Max Kilman for $47.5 million. They spent the money decently well. They still have a couple of players they could bring in for the remaining funds to officially complete the quote-unquote swap. But I feel like Wolves did a better job investing after their star player left in comparison to Fulham, and that will be the deciding factor. Paulinho got a couple million more, but the money spent from Fulham just wasn't there because they really didn't spend it. Wolves spent it and tried to get the squad better. Gary O'Neill will keep this team in the Premier League, and I think he'll do it just one more time before he eventually gets the sack, and then someone else is brought in who will also keep Wolves in the Premier League. I feel like they have a couple of years left before they go back down to the Championship, but this year, no worries for them. They're safe by mid-April. 13th, Southampton. I did not learn my lesson from last year where I put Burnley in 12th, one of the newly promoted teams who ended up finishing in the relegation zone. This year, I feel like this one has a lot better chance of succeeding. Last year, I trusted in Vincent Kompany. It did not pay off. This year, I trust Southampton, who last time they got promoted to the Premier League had a good decade run in the league, and I feel like they can do it again. This team, yeah, it might not be the most inspiring team in the Premier League. Leicester might be a better team on paper who came up with them. But I feel like the Southampton team and just the Southampton culture keeps them above a team like Leicester, like Fulham, and like Wolves. Looking at their signings, Bellis for $23 million from Man City, Flynn Downs for just under $18 million from West Ham, Ben Brereton Diaz for $8.3 million from Villarreal. That's a big signing, Brereton Diaz. I've been a big fan of his for years after he tore it up in the Championship with Blackburn, I believe, at the turn of the decade. Charlie Taylor on a free from Burnley, Wellington on a free from Sao Paulo, and Adam Lallana from Brighton on a free. The Lallana one is more for experience in coaching, but I like it. You have to have that experience, and I feel like that's also why they brought in Charlie Taylor along with Wellington. Two left backs, one more experienced than the other, and one who's had Premier League experience opposed to Wellington, who has not. I like those signings from Southampton. Yes, they lost Catalina Carr for $3 million to Lyon. That might hurt a little bit, along with Perraud and Che Adams leaving as well. But Che Adams leaving is not one I'm really concerned about. He didn't really do anything in the Euros, so that's why he was still looking for a club. He ended up settling with Torino. There's a lot of good talent in this Southampton team. You have Adam Armstrong, who has been good the last couple of years. He has started to improve. Bazunu, I feel like, is ready for redemption between the sticks. And a couple other guys in that team. They're a mid-table side. I think they'll stay there for a couple of years. But if the Saints play their cards right, they can start off hot in the Premier League and make their way back up to where they were in 2013-14, competing for Europe. 12th, Brighton. This is one of the more difficult ones on the list. When you look at Brighton, you're usually thinking, okay, they can finish anywhere from 14th to 5th. It's a large margin for them, but there's a reason why. They have a lot of talented players, but the manager has been a question mark since really the halfway point of last year. De Zerbi Ball did great. It worked at the beginning, but last year it kind of fell off. He has since left the club, and now they bring in flavor of the month Fabian Herzler. The hipsters love him, to quote the Irish guy, but he has a point. It is a weird appointment. I see what they're trying to do, and looking at his signings, you can kind of see his statement of intent, dropping a combined $65 million on Weifer and Minta from Feyenoord and Newcastle, respectively. You also have Osman coming in for just under $20 million from Nordsjælland. A couple other guys coming in. One that I do like is Dieber, I believe, from Arsenal's U21 team on a free. Brighton knows how to find talents. That's why when I was looking at Transfer Market, who once again the values come from them, when I saw a player come in on a free, I was intrigued. I looked more at the bottom of the list because Brighton scouts know where to find talent. I feel like he could potentially be a guy to watch for a breakout campaign, even if they loan him out. I feel like he could have a successful stint with Brighton or wherever he goes on loan this year. As for players leaving, no one really. Between the sticks, they have Verbruggen, more experienced, was part of the team that got to the Final Four in the Euros from the Netherlands. They were a pretty good team. He, between the sticks, beat out a couple of guys with more experience. Didn't do that bad. Yes, he allowed more than a goal per game on average. His rating ended up being just below 7. But that's an improvement. He's a young goalkeeper. He's trying to avoid what happened to Ilan Melier a couple of years ago, where he was supposed to be really good and then never developed, and now is with Leeds in the championship. I feel like Verbruggen is going to avoid that with ease. Last year, 6.7 match rating in 27 games. Ended up being pushed out of the squad by Steele towards the end of the campaign. He'll be the number one. I feel like De Zerbi was experimenting. For some reason, didn't like Verbruggen. Went with experience, and it really didn't pay off. As Steele, I feel like, made the team worse. So going into 24-25, Verbruggen between the sticks. You still have Enciso, who has been really good. Matoma, another guy. Evan Ferguson in the center. You also have a couple other young talents making their way through the team. Brighton in 12th. It might be an underperforming season, but this is what happens when you bring in a new manager. It takes time to learn the scheme, especially with an unproven manager. There will be growing pains this year, but the Seagulls will find themselves in 12th come May. 11th, Bournemouth. Bournemouth really did a good job last year in the Premier League. They silenced the doubters. They silenced the haters. They silenced a lot of influencers who get paid to speak about the sport, but were proven completely wrong as they looked good on the pitch last year. Iraola, a big reason why a lot of people liked him as a manager. A lot didn't, but the ones who liked him were proven correct in year one at least. He had a couple of good loan players such as Unal and Sinistera. He brought him back this year for around $40 million combined. Good business there. Brought in a couple of players from Juventus. But in the case of players leaving, Kiefer Moore and Lloyd Kelly, the main two, nothing really to mention. They got better. And that is what mid-table teams need to do. When you look at this table, you can sit down, look at their squads from last year, look at them this year. Did this team get better, yes or no? I feel like that's one of the few teams that can put a check mark next to that. You can't with Wolves, they lost their captain. You can't with Fulham, they lost their best player. Everton, they lost a lot of good talent. You can't put it next to them. Leicester, maybe. But Bournemouth is a team who you can definitely look at that roster and put a check mark next to them and say, okay, this team is improved from last year and will probably finish higher than they did last year. Iraola ball is in at Bournemouth. I feel like he's going to be there for a couple more years. But as for the 24-25 season, it's progress. They'll finish in 11th, and they'll look to continue climbing the ladder in the next couple of years to try and make a push for a Conference League spot. I feel like it is a very underrated prediction to put them in a Conference League spot in the next couple of years. I know at least one person has predicted it other than me. I'll go out there and say it as well. In the next 5 years, I feel like we will see Bournemouth in the Conference League, if and only if Iraola is still there and implementing his scheme. But also, Bournemouth doesn't feel pressure to sell their best players. Those are my stipulations for it. We'll see if that prediction comes true in 5 years' time. 10th, West Ham. New manager, no more Moyes. Lopetegui, if he buys into the West Ham project, can really make this a good team. He just brought in Somerville, the second and final newly announced transfer before I started recording. He comes in for $25 million from Leeds after posting 20 goals and 9 assists in 46 games in the championship last year. He looked like a really good player and a player who can easily make an impact in the Premier League and be the next man to make that jump from the championship to the Premier League and be a star. In other signings, Max Kilman coming in for just under $50 million is a statement of intent. Bolsters the defense. Him and Zuma as center backs will be fun to watch with Iraola between the sticks. The defense for West Ham has been shored up for sure. Additionally, Guilherme, I believe is how you say it. It's a difficult name to pronounce. The Brazilian, I believe, comes across for $23 million from Palmeiras. But we do have to address the elephant in the room before we go to the outgoing transfers. Lucas Paqueta, do we see him banned or do we not? If he is banned, he has played his last game in a West Ham jersey. It'll probably be a long-term ban. He might have played his final game of professional football. We don't know. Assuming the ban doesn't happen, I feel like West Ham's fine. But otherwise, you could have to see a Somerville or Guilherme step up way earlier than expected for this team to play out on the wing or in an attacking midfield role. It's tough to really think about. In a perfect world for West Ham, they have Paqueta, and he is able to be a star once again for the Hammers. In a not-so-perfect world, which is the world we live in, there's a good chance he is banned. It'd be very unfortunate. Hopefully that situation resolves itself and Paqueta can just focus on his football and being the talent that we all know he is. But we have to mention it. We can't just glance over the fact that one of the best players that West Ham has had over the past decade could be gone in the blink of an eye. As for transfers, Saeed Benrahma, Flynn Downs, and Thilo Kelleher transferring out of the club to Lyon, Southampton, and Monaco respectively. Benrahma not the player he was expected to be after making the move across from Brentford a couple of years ago. Actually, more like a half decade ago, I think. Don't quote me, but I feel like he transferred over in 2018 or 2019, which, if that's the case, one, I feel really old, but two, a couple of years ago feels like it'd be in 2020, 2019, 2018, but no, it's really 22 and 21. It's really weird just to think about how quickly time has gone, and West Ham, time has benefited them. A couple of years ago, they were nearly relegated, but they did what they needed to do and survived another year in the Premier League, which then they built upon, and now that has them sitting in 10th. I feel like it's going to be a good year. The last couple of game weeks are going to slip up. That's why they're going to finish in 10th, but overall, the Hammers fans really can't complain about a 10th place finish. 9th, Crystal Palace. It is a bold thing to predict a team who lost their best player to finish one spot higher than they did in the prior season. It's crazy almost, but yet I'm doing it. I really believe in what Oliver Glasner has done for this Crystal Palace team. Since he took over, he has made this Crystal Palace team one of the best teams in the Premier League. No, I'm not saying that Crystal Palace is one of the best teams in the Premier League. I'm saying from when he took over in late February to the end of the year, very few teams outperformed Crystal Palace. That is what I'm saying. I'm not saying Crystal Palace deserves to be in the Champions League or anything along those lines. They're definitely a couple of years away from that. But Elise now going to Bayern for $53 million. They got some money. They really haven't spent much of it yet. I would like to see them make a couple of ambitious signings to stay competitive. But either way, I feel like Oliver Glasner is the right man to keep this team moving in the right direction. If Roy Hodgson was still at the wheel for Crystal Palace, I feel like I would have had them in that category with Fulham and Wolves in either 16th or, I believe, 14th. Somewhere around there. But with Glasner, I feel like they have the tools to stay up and will stay up easily in 9th. In a couple years' time, if they invest well, I could potentially see this team finding their way into Europe and being the next real surprise team after Villa, Newcastle, and Southampton. I believe the last three teams to really be shocked to make their respective European competitions. 8th, Aston Villa. A big drop-off for Aston Villa is incoming. Why do I say that after they finish in 4th place? You have to now factor in the Champions League. Yes, Unai Emery is one of the best managers in the Premier League, a seasoned pro in Europe, especially in the Europa League, but this Villa side is not. I feel like they're going to struggle with the extra matches, the extra pressure to perform in the Champions League, similar to what Newcastle did last year. You had a lot of talented players in that team, Guimaraes, Ben Botman, who played in the Champions League before, if I'm not mistaken, but that wasn't enough to guide them out of a very tough group as they got the short end of the stick. Milan in that group, Dortmund in that group, PSG in that group. It was the real group of death, but Newcastle did a great job. Villa, I feel like they could find their way into 3rd place and in the Europa League, but even so, that's extra games. They're going to struggle. Emi Martinez will be good between the sticks. Injuries could kill this team, but when you look at the transfers they've made ambitious signings finally. If I made this video a couple months ago, I may have had them as low as 9th just because they didn't make ambitious signings. All they had was Ross Barkley at first, but now Amadou Onana, Ian Maatson, Cam Archer, they look like they're going to make a statement this year, and that's exactly what Aston Villa needs to do. Make a statement in the Premier League. But I don't think they're going to be able to do it quite as well as expected. Bring them down to 8th, and I feel like, as I predicted earlier when writing this down for Newcastle and what you'll see in a couple minutes, I feel like a year out of Europe will do wonders for the team to get them back competing and make them a mainstay in the top 6. 7th, Chelsea. When looking at this Chelsea team, you'd think, okay, they can make the top 4. But at the same time, Todd Boehly has managed this team as the owner like it's career mode. That's the only way to put it. Big signings every year, and we've proven Moneyball doesn't necessarily always work. It works in the case of Man City, but Chelsea, not so much. They could have had Enzo Fernandez for around $20 million before the World Cup, but after it, Todd Boehly turned around and threw $100 million at Benfica. Ended up being a big financial disaster for them. He still is a quality player, but has some controversy behind him. With that being said, how does the locker room respond to the comments that he made? How does this affect morale around the team? How does this affect the media perception? And how much more pressure does this put on Enzo Maresca, who already is under a lot of pressure, given he's replacing Pochettino, who is a better manager, and will be asked to do better than Pochettino, who got fired after 1 year in the job at Chelsea? It's not a good combination. Shrewsbury Hall is an interesting signing. That's not where I would have looked for Chelsea. They brought in a new goalkeeper in Jorgensen. Once again, would not have looked for another goalkeeper. They already have plenty. They have Adebayo coming in on a free. That might be their best piece of business they did all window, a free transfer. And that being said, for Chelsea is shocking given the money we've seen them throw around since 2004 when Roman Abramovich became the owner. It's just weird to see this dynamic that the best move that they have made is a free transfer. And that is not the winning mentality that Chelsea was used to in the 2010s under Conte, under Mourinho. It's a different team. It's a completely different squad and a different mantra that Chelsea has. It's a change of pace for them, and it will have them finish lower. The sales they've had, Maatson, Hall, Hutchinson, nothing crazy. Thiago Silva leaving on a free will potentially hurt them. Ziyech, not really. He wasn't part of the plans, but I feel like Chelsea is going to fall a little bit into 7th. It's going to be a tough task for them to get back to their best. I still think we're a couple years away from seeing this Chelsea project get to where Todd Boehly expects them to be right now. 6th, Liverpool. When looking at this Liverpool team, it's basically the same exact team that they fielded all of last year. They have looked really good in preseason, and under Arne Slot, they look to be a good team. However, I think we're underestimating the impact that Jurgen Klopp had on this group. Even with all the injuries a couple of years ago, he dragged them into a top 8 finish. He had to rely on Nat Phillips game after game when he's used to a prime Joe Gomez and Virgil van Dijk, or even Joel Matip, who just left the club, in the center back role, but had to go really down the list to get Phillips. And they still had a coherent team on the field somehow in some way. Klopp is gone. Matip is gone. Thiago retired. And you could potentially lose Salah and Alisson among players to Saudi, depending on how much money is offered. It's not really a likely rumor as of right now, but I feel like that can easily change. What does Salah have left to prove at Liverpool? He's won his Premier League title. He's won the Champions League. He has won a couple other trophies. He has revived his career and has become a Liverpool legend. Probably the best player out of the trio that was when they won the Champions League in himself, Firmino, and Sadio Mane. So why not get some more money? Go out to Saudi Arabia and end his career. Same thing with Alisson. He was a good goalkeeper at Roma. Came across for, I believe, around $60 million. And made an impact far beyond the valuation of $60 million. So why not go get the bag in Saudi? I don't think Arne Slot is going to have the locker room fully until halfway through the year. I feel like in the end they're going to make their way into 6th, getting over Chelsea, but it's going to be a struggle. I could also see Liverpool finishing in the top 3. If Arne Slot is able to incorporate some new guys into this team, which as of right now he has not, and if he's able to implement his tactics into this team, which as of right now it looks like he can, I feel like Liverpool is poised for a great season. And either if Salah leaves or doesn't leave, this season is going to ride on the talents of Szoboszlai and McAllister. The games are won and lost in the midfield in the Premier League. If you have a good midfield, you're very much in good shape. When you look at these teams that have started to make their way up the table, you have Newcastle, Tonali, obviously banned, but you have Guimaraes, who was really good this past year. For Villa, Yuri Tillemans, another example of it. Man City, a mainstay at the top. KDB, Rodri, two of the best midfielders in the world. Rodri, arguably the best right now. Man U tried doing that, but in the end failed with Casemiro. And now Scott McTominay, being one of their best midfielders, doesn't put them in the best of spots. The midfield is really important in the Premier League, and I feel like it's going to be a heavy reliance on Szoboszlai and McAllister that makes Liverpool either a great team or a team that struggles. Szoboszlai will do his thing, so will McAllister. But in the end, 6th place feels about right for Liverpool. 5th, Newcastle. I alluded to it earlier, but being out of Europe this year will really benefit Newcastle. They won't have to manage extra fixtures, extra tough games against the likes of AC Milan, Dortmund, and PSG like they did last year, and that will move them up the table. Looking at their signings, Lewis Hall and Vlachodimos for a backup goalkeeper, and Lloyd Kelly in on a free. They also really didn't lose anyone all that important. Elliot Anderson did get some playing time at points last year. I believe started 10 games out of the 21 he played. But this team looks poised to get back into Europe. I don't think it'll be in the Champions League, and I think they'll play with a chip on their shoulder, given that they were a Man City easy win away from making it back to Europe for the 2nd consecutive year, but that was ruined by Man U shocking City in the FA Cup final. They're going to get back to Europe, the Europa League first, and Eddie Howe will get them back to the promised land of the Champions League in a few short years. I feel like in 25-26 they can easily make it back there. But first things first, they finished in 5th this year and put an impressive display on the pitch. Look for Alexander Isak to compete for the Golden Boot. I would say right now my prediction for him, 25 goals. Bookmark it, clip it, do whatever you want with that audio. I feel like Alexander Isak is poised and will score 25 plus goals this year for Newcastle. 4th, Tottenham. Ange Ball gets Tottenham over the line and back into the Champions League. They've been gone for the last couple of years, but I feel like they're just going to squeak over the line. They were close this year, but they're going to make amends this year, and Ange will make his first real big step in erasing the curse of Tottenham that has plagued them since their last trophy, their last major trophy, I do have to say, in 2008. We don't count the preseason trophies that they won in 2019 and this past year. Looking at their squad, Archie Gray coming in from Leeds for $41 million, a great bit of business. He will be a star for Tottenham. I feel like even right off the bat, he is going to make an impact. They lost some key guys, Højbjerg in the center of the park. I feel like they're going to be able to replace him quite easily, and his impact will be felt with Marseille, but his impact won't be missed at Tottenham. I feel like it's a win-win for both teams. Marseille, mentioned their name a couple of times. I think they're going to have a good year in France, but focusing on Tottenham, they lost a couple of guys. They spent the money wisely. Ange is going to get this team into the Champions League, and when they're in it in 25-26, I feel like we could see them in the quarterfinals. 3rd, Arsenal. Yes, I have Arsenal in 3rd and not the top 2. Why, you may ask? We're going to look at who they signed. Calafiori. He was inconsistent at times in the Euros. He played well for Bologna in their impressive season, but the burnout last year concerned me. The burnout the prior year concerned me. I feel like we're going to see it again from Arsenal. People have them winning the league. I just don't see it. I think we're going to see Mikel Arteta not necessarily give up, but run out of steam come game week 34, and he is going to start to struggle. This side, they're a good team. I feel like they will win a Premier League in the next 10 years, but this is not the year. They finish in third, a few points behind who I have in second place. Second, Man United. Call me biased, call me a homer. I have my team in second place for the second straight year. Come at me. They finished in 8th last year. This is a bold prediction, and I'll back it up. Euro for 62 million, a good signing. Unfortunately, he already did get hurt, so hopefully he'll be able to come back and make an impact early and often into his Manchester United career. I've seen people make the comparison to the Varane signing in 2011, or in Man U's case, the lack thereof a signing. I'm glad we went with Euro over Branthwaite. Branthwaite would have just been a repeat of that, where we signed Phil Jones opposed to Varane. This time we got the Varane equivalent, so I feel like we're in a good spot defensively. We still have De Ligt, who could potentially come through the door. Mazraoui, as of late, being linked to Man U. The fullback would bolster our squad. Ugarte would be an excellent signing from PSG. And going back to confirmed signings, Joshua Zirkzee, having another striker, another target man to compete with Højlund is huge. That will motivate him to really step up his game. It's going to be a big year for Rasmus Højlund, and I feel like him and Zirkzee combined will do great things. Yes, you lost a couple of key guys in Varane and Amrabat, who got a lot of game time last year, and in Varane's case, just as a leadership perspective, you lose that. But Martial didn't really do much in the last couple of years, is gone. Williams, gone. And Mason Greenwood, just going to keep his mention brief. An extra $26 million. Given what has happened, Man U will take the money and reinvest, and they have. They basically swap a guy they haven't used in the last couple of years with a guy who had a great year for an up-and-coming Bologna team and added £15 million onto it. When you look at it that way, it's a great deal from Sir Jim Ratcliffe. It's a new era at Man U. They're not going to win the title this year. I don't know if it comes next year, but I feel like, just like Arsenal, in the next 10 years, they'll be lifting the Premier League trophy. First, Manchester City. Who else was it going to be? I'm not going to be the guy to predict Man City to not get their 5th Premier League title in a row. That would be foolish on my part. However, I will say this is the last title they win. Even if Ederson leaves this year, I feel like they have enough in the tank, but the hammer will come down at some point. What goes up must come down. Every empire must fall. I feel like the empire that Man City has is going to fall very soon. You're going to start to see it towards the end of the year. They're going to lock up the Premier League, and then the collapse will happen. Last year, the FA Cup was a sign of things to come. I believe Pep potentially could leave at the end of this upcoming season, and if he does, you'll see a lot of top players, Rodri, KDB, Julian Alvarez, who might even leave before the season starts, leave. It's going to be a lot for Man City. They're going to enjoy this Premier League title, but I feel like the age of dominance for Manchester City is over, and the next couple of years, Manchester will start wiping away the blue and returning to their red core. But with that, that will do it for my predictions of the 24-25 Premier League season. Same champion, a couple of shocks, a couple of big predictions made. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I like this kind of video. Get to make predictions, get to show off my ball knowledge, and potentially improve upon my knowledge from last year. Like I said, my goal is to get to 45 points or lower through this prediction. I feel like I have a good chance to get there. Follow me on Instagram at SmeeSports and on Twitter at SmeeFist2024, and subscribe here to the SmeeSports YouTube channel. Enable push notifications to never miss an upload of mine. My goal is to get up to 250 subscribers by the end of this year. Almost at 100. Looking forward to hitting that first major milestone. Want to go back and watch any of my prior predictions, interviews, go in the videos tab. As for my live broadcast, go in the live tab. You'll see plenty of baseball games from this past summer there. A lot of good content, and a lot of the top players and the future of the sport can be seen over there. But with that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.